You mentioned near infrared, and a lot of people do near infrared sauna. Same principle, same thing, correct?
Not really. Near infrared sauna is largely a misnomer. And I've sort of fought back on this landscape of the industry. There's some problems in the marketing and the misrepresentation of certain facts that many companies are involved in. So near infrared is mostly non-heating. Okay, it doesn't heat the air. It doesn't really heat our bodies very much. Very slight heating effect you might notice with using these LED lights, but it doesn't really get hot, and it doesn't get you hot. So if you made a sauna that only had near infrared energy in it, it wouldn't be a sauna. It wouldn't get hot. The sauna is created, there's two ways to create it. Traditional saunas use convection to basically heat the air of the room, hot rocks or a fire or something like that. And then we have infrared saunas, and they're primarily using far infrared energy, not near infrared, to heat your body. Far infrared acts differently than near infrared. Far infrared actually doesn't penetrate deeply into your tissues. It mostly gets absorbed in the outer layers, and it gets absorbed by water in your cells. It doesn't do what red and near infrared light does. It doesn't do all those mechanisms I described before about how it interacts with mitochondria and how it modulates gene expression and mitochondrial produced melatonin and so on. Far infrared isn't doing that stuff. It's heating the water of your cells to make you hotter. Okay, that's also bioactive to an extent. Being hot is, especially if you sit in a sauna and get really hot, that is absolutely bioactive, but it's not doing the same things as red and near infrared light are. So the idea of a near infrared sauna is actually a misnomer. There is no such thing. Only in the sense that you could make a far infrared sauna or a traditional sauna that is a hot room, a hot chamber, that also has near infrared of some kind in there. And then there are some companies that are using heat lamps. I don't really consider them a sauna. They get hot, but mostly what they're doing is heating up your body. The chamber doesn't really get hot enough to be classified as a sauna. It's sort of a weird in-between territory. And then those lights have a part of the spectrum that is near infrared. I think it's 20 or 30% of the light output is near infrared. They also have mid and far infrared, and they have visible red as well. So they're sort of like a hybrid in-between territory. It's likely that they do have benefits, but it hasn't been tested thoroughly enough and compared to some of the other tried and true light devices, whether it's lasers or LEDs, where we really have a solid base of evidence for us to say with any sort of certainty what those heat lamp based sauna tents are doing or not doing.
Thanks for elaborating on that, because I just hear a lot of people right now probably have what are being called infrared saunas and getting in them and maybe misconstruing this whole conversation. So
yeah.
What about sunshine? Can we back up just a little bit? So like, let's say I don't want to buy an infrared light device and I just want to get, good quality infrared outside. Is there a time of day that's better? Is there a length of time that's better? Again, knowing some people have different skin tones, and so there may be some issues with burning, but what are your advice tips on that?
As a general rule, my advice would be get the maximum amount of sun exposure that your skin type is able to tolerate. And there's two aspects of that. I should say that your skin is able to tolerate, not just skin type. Two aspects of it. One is skin type, which is mostly a function of genetics and ancestry. And the other one is other lifestyle factors, especially nutrition, heavily influence your skin's tolerance to sunlight. I'll maybe briefly describe that, but basically if you don't eat a healthy diet, if you're eating lots of processed junk, if you don't have a good profile of omega-6 to 3s in your tissues, if you're not eating lots of plant foods and phytonutrients, it is very likely that your skin will have a very, very poor tolerance to sun exposure and will very easily get burned and damaged maybe even react sometimes with rashes or things like that. So that's one aspect of it, is that your overall health, especially your diet, influences your skin's tolerance to it. The other one is ancestry, and there's something called Fitzpatrick skin types, if people want to do a Google image search for that. The basic idea of it is, on one end of the spectrum, you have the very dark skinned African people, and on the other end of the spectrum you have red-headed Irish people who are very, very pasty. And actually the red-headed Irish people have, I don't know what your ancestry is, Peter, but you might, I'm guessing European, but I don't know if you have Irish in you.
I do, yeah.
Okay, so the hardcore, the extreme of that is a different. They have a different type of melanin in their skin, and as opposed to me, where I don't know what you have. I would have to maybe see you in person to tell. But for me, I have the same type of melanin, and the vast majority of white people do have the same type of melanin that a very dark-skinned Black African guy would have, or man or woman, I should say. But then there's this small category of Europeans that actually evolved a different type of melanin. And the reason primarily had to do, without getting too bogged down in the details, it had to do with the historical amounts of sun exposure that your ancestors got. And basically, the less sunlight they got on a regular basis, the more that evolution selected for paler and paler skin, and ultimately this special type of melatonin, in order to capture more benefits from sunlight in a smaller window of time. Another way of saying this is, the darker your skin is, the more sunlight your body needs to be healthy. So, and the paler your skin, the less sunlight it needs, and the more you can get away with very little sunlight exposure and still be relatively healthy. My ancestry is from all around the Mediterranean region. So I'm sort of smack dab in the middle between the palest people and the darkest people. I require a lot of sun. I have a very high tolerance to the sun without any sunscreen. I live half the year in Costa Rica. I surf. I spend a lot of time in the hot tropical sun, and my skin can tolerate it fine without burning. And I function best when I get lots of sun. I notice my health really declines when I'm not getting lots of sun. So the general principle is, be healthy enough that you increase your skin's tolerance to it and get the maximal amount of sun exposure that your skin can tolerate before burning, before getting damaged. And there's another important aspect to this, which is we have a built-in sunscreen that evolved into our biology called melanin. And melanin is our internal sunscreen that evolved to prevent damage from ultraviolet light from the sun. When you go in this, it's the same principle as when you challenge your muscles by lifting heavy objects, they adapt by growing bigger and stronger. Well, our skin does the same thing when you go in the sunlight. It adapts by producing more melanin in the skin to be more resistant to being damaged from the sun. And that's essentially what darker skin is. If you look at very dark-skinned African people or people of that ancestry, that's all it is. It's their ancestry evolved with more sunlight than other people with different color skins. And so they have that sort of now encoded into their genetics, that from birth, we're going to prepare you for sun exposure by having this much melanin in your skin. And so let me add one layer to this to link it up with what I wanted to touch on before. You mentioned dermatologists and the idea of skin cancer. The body of evidence on that subject is not what most people think it is. It is absolutely not a link of the more sun you get, the more cancer you have. Okay? And we know this because there are very simple experiments where you can look at outdoor workers like construction workers or gardeners and compare them with desk job workers who work indoors in an office at a desk all day. And there is a difference of 9 or 10-fold in terms of the amount of sun exposure they get on their skin. And it's not that these outdoor workers have massively higher rates of skin cancer. In fact, in most of these studies, the outdoor workers have lower rates of skin cancer than indoor workers. Okay, and there's lots of other layers to this, but rates of skin cancer in areas of the body that aren't even exposed to the sun have also increased dramatically. Basically, the whole narrative that skin cancer is a function of sun exposure is largely very, very misguided. Okay, modern humans get less sun exposure than ever before in our evolution, and the rates of skin cancer have increased dramatically during that same window of time that we have gotten less and less sun exposure. It is not a problem of people getting too much sun exposure. There are some types of cancer that are linked to it, but the main link is actually with something that's called intermittent sun exposure. Okay, and what that means in the literature is essentially someone who doesn't normally get sun exposure, but occasionally goes out in the sun. So let's say someone who spends a holiday occasionally in Hawaii. They normally live in Seattle. They travel to Hawaii to go on vacation. They bathe in the sun all day, 2 days in a row. Now they've fried their skin. Okay. That's when you will induce a lot of DNA damage and actually increase your risk of cancer. Is you have a body that is unprepared for sun exposure, and then you go get a ton of it. Okay, and so that's like, as an analogy, imagine somebody who's sedentary for 6 months and then goes and decides to run a marathon. Running a marathon for that person is going to be very, very harmful to their body. They're going to probably get stress fractures. They're going to induce a lot of muscular damage, kidney damage. It's only going to be harmful. It's not going to be beneficial to them. Okay, and so that's the proper context to understand this. So the more instances you have of this kind of real overdose with intermittent sun exposure, the more likely you are to get skin cancer. But that is not true in people who regularly get sun exposure and have conditioned their skin for it, have built up their internal melanin, and get sun exposure within the bounds or close to within the bounds of what their skin is conditioned to tolerate.